Before we begin, the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any affiliated organization. The content provided is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as professional advice. We encourage listeners to conduct their own research and consult with relevant professionals before making any business or career decisions. Enjoy the episode.
Good morning and welcome back to Coffee and Career Chats Startup Edition. I'm your host Adel Hameed, and today we're diving into one of the most critical topics for any startup leader: mastering startup leadership. Whether you're managing a growing team or just stepping into your leadership role, this episode is packed with practical strategies and advice to help you become a strong, empathetic, and adaptable leader. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's get started. Let's kick off by talking about the LEDA Leadership Framework, which is a framework I developed to help startup leaders excel in the fast-paced world of entrepreneurship. LEDA stands for Leading with Empathy, Empowering Employees, Decisive Decision-Making, and Adaptability to Change. Mastering these four qualities sets apart thriving startup leaders from those who struggle to keep up. Leading with empathy. Empathy forms the bedrock of effective leadership. Understanding your team's needs and motivations fosters trust and collaboration, which is essential in a high-pressure startup environment. In my experience, empathy has been crucial on both sides of the leadership equation. There was a time when I had to hand over an unfinished project to a colleague, another leader, who wasn't the right fit to complete the job or complete the project. At least this is what I believed in. This left me vulnerable, and I feared receiving criticism for something out of my control. It highlighted how important empathy is to me and understanding not just the outcome, but the circumstances. Empowering employees. Successful leaders know how to delegate effectively. Empowering your team enables them to take ownership, fostering innovation and accountability. I've personally coached and transformed numerous potential leaders by guiding them to think like designers and leaders, capable of creating other leaders. So they see themselves as coaches. They might not call themselves coaches, but this is at least the way that they see themselves as they build the next layer of leaders. So out of 10 leaders I mentored, I would say over 90% of them, or 9 of them, flourished once they were given that autonomy and trust as well. And then we've got the third phrase within the acronym: Decisive Decision-Making. In a startup, quick decision-making with limited information is the norm. Strong leaders need to make swift yet informed decisions, trusting both their instincts and the available data. A crucial part of this is being proactive about risk, knowing when to act to prevent small issues from spiraling into larger problems. In my view, it's essential to balance instinct with preparation, always being ready to pivot when necessary. Now, having said that, it's not as easy to implement as anyone would think, because it's like riding a bicycle or driving a car. You need a bit of time, practice, coaching, so that you become comfortable with it. So when you have people who will try to bully you, implement the seed of doubt in your decisions, you become like a mountain. Nothing phases you. And then the fourth letter, which is A from the LEDA acronym, is adaptability to change. Startups are dynamic environments, or startups have dynamic environments, and leaders must be flexible to handle shifting market trends, internal priorities. You're dealing with people, whether they're customers or employees. You have to have the headspace to be able to address the issues, prioritize the issues that you need to address. Not everything is of a high priority, and not everyone that comes in with a louder voice is sharing with you something of a higher importance for your role. So I firmly believe that being prepared for the unexpected is key. Paranoia saves. It's not a bad thing. I actually joke around sometimes with my colleagues. I tell them I'm paranoid, and that is probably one of the qualities that makes me good at what I do. For instance, it's always wise to have a backup plan. If a critical team member, like a chief engineer, leaves, what will you do? You need to have business continuity in your strategy, as part of your strategy, as part of your day-to-day plan. If someone is hit by a bus, as they say, what will happen to the operation, including you, including me? So let's say if a competitor comes with a new product, suddenly makes your strategy obsolete, what do you do there? Being adaptable means having contingencies ready. Now, realistically, you can't have a contingency for everything because you have your daily work. You need to deliver results, and all you have to do is just do your best. As the company grows and the leadership team grows, you start becoming better at it. It's very important as well to record. That's another thing as well that has been helpful in helping me become adaptable to change, is learn from the mistakes. There is no room to criticize yourself to the extent where you feed into your imposter syndrome, where you lead yourself into depression. That's not the purpose. However, the purpose is to learn so that you train your brain to pick these trends before they emerge or before they become a problem. And sometimes also our brains, because we're so fixated on an objective, we ignore the signs. And this happens to all of us. How do you train your brain to not ignore the signs? Also another exercise or another benefit from self-reflection. We'll talk about all of these in later episodes. Today we'll just remain focused on the 3 topics we have on the agenda. So I've witnessed firsthand how applying the LEDA principles helps teams. Even in most cases, I don't call them the LEDA principles, but these 4 qualities, they're the qualities I seek and I nurture and I focus on when coaching team members, when coaching executives, and whether they're existing executives or emerging executives. Anyways, in my view, the LEDA framework and these 4 qualities provide the foundation needed to navigate that uncertainty effectively within the organization, within the startup. Now, the second topic, that's also another thing I published an article on. So it's the acronym ABM. So think of MBA, ABM, you flip it. For marketing experts, ABM means something else, right? But from this perspective, I'm calling it the action-based mastery, or the ABM, the leadership framework. Action-based mastery is basically how do you take what you learn, all the theories, and then turn them into habits and checklists and actions. And how do you prioritize your work as a leader? That's also another thing you have to keep in mind, which is part of my Skill Up as you Scale Up system. one of the biggest challenges for startup leaders is balancing the high-level strategy with day-to-day operations. The ABM Leadership Framework helps you excel at both, ensuring your time is spent wisely across strategic, operational, and tactical levels in line with your startup's growth stages. It's very important that you remain relevant. The risk of not doing this properly is, as your company grows, you start failing at delegating and building the next layer of leaders, and you will become a bottleneck. So what happens? You either are replaced, or you suddenly see yourself having a new boss between you and the CEO that you have to report to. So this framework will help you stay relevant. And it's been tested. I've tested it throughout my tenure with Paytabs over the past 5 years, and with some peers that I've been sharing this framework with. So it still requires further tests. This is where I'm open to coach without charging anyone anything. I'm willing to help out and coach some executives for free on this, because I want to make sure that this develops into something that can be useful for everyone. I'm a practitioner. This has been more of a passion, so I'm not charging anything other than selling the books. I'm not charging anything for any of the information. The ebook is actually 99 cents on Kindle, which is the lowest I'm allowed to sell on Kindle, except for the printed books, because there is a cost associated with it. And yeah, so the prices are there, but the focus, is to make sure that I'm sharing something that is useful for you. It's not about making money, at least for now. Go back to the ABM framework. At the seed stage, so there are 4 phases. If we summarize it and simplify it, there are 4 phases. The first phase is pre-seed, which it's only an idea, right? I would like to combine that with the seed stage, pre-seed, seed stage. It's an idea. So you need to build a product to achieve product market fit, to see whether there is a demand, is someone willing to pay for the product, yes or no. And let's categorize your work as a startup leader into 3 categories. The first category is strategic work, the second one tactical, and the third one, the tactical, is more of enhancement projects. And then the third one is operational, delivering the service day to day. Like for dealing with tickets, customers submit support tickets, you answer them, and so on. So at this early phase of seed stage, your focus is on achieving product market fit and defining processes around service delivery and product support. Your role is more hands-on with customer interactions and less on strategic planning. Now, when you get into the startup stage, as your company matures, or the product matures, your role shifts towards defining processes, implementing basic controls, and building your team so they can do the work and you supervise them. And you take a step backward, a step further away from the action. You'll become less involved in daily operations and more focused on strategic enhancements, all while developing the next layer of leaders. That means the supervisors, the team leaders. This is when you start planning a scalable structure. So at this stage, you're getting probably more involved into strategic planning, but not fully involved in it. It would probably consume 10%, not more than 10% of your time. 10-20% of your time. Of course, if there are problems that you need to resolve at a specific period of time, that might vary. But for an abstract way of clarifying how this works, let's say it's 10%. And most of your time goes into the enhancement and operational work. But less on operational and more on enhancements. And then the next stage, which is the scale-up stage. In reality, there is the scale-up stage, and then there is the stage where you reach maturity. Whether you hit IPO, you become a corporation, a mature corporation. It becomes a big ship. You need to have hierarchy, structure that runs the company. It depends also which industry you're in, which sector you're in. So all of that factors in. To simplify it, we're just saying scale up and beyond. So at this stage, your team should be handling the day-to-day operations while contributing to key enhancement projects. You as a leader transition into a systems designer, focusing on strategy and decentralizing decision-making across regions, departments, functions, countries, so you can create a scalable model that scales as the business grows. Empower your team by giving them systems. So empowering them by giving them systems that allow them to become independent in decision making, fostering accountability amongst these teams, and that culture will flourish as the company grows, while freeing your focus or you to focus on larger strategic objectives. If there are any strategic partnerships that you need to get into, any new products that you need to focus on, emerging products that you need to focus on. For example, now with AI, as AI is maturing up, you would have been focusing about, okay, how can we increase our efficiency through AI? So if the ratio is to have 100 customers to one ticket, or one ticket to 100 customers, how can I reduce that? How can I make it one ticket to are opened by an average of 1,000 customers? So all of these things are things that are to be considered and which will be resolved, because the whole idea or the whole objective of the ABM leadership framework is to give you a framework to think. You are mindful of what is to come, and you are more confident because you know how it works. That's the main objective behind it. And then I'd like to touch on a third topic today before we end this episode. I usually go through articles on Harvard Business Review and different, like McKinsey & Co. and different publications. But I've been listing some of these articles that I'd like to share in this episode. And I've been listing different articles within my queue or within the pipeline that I'd like to share within these episodes, because there will be practical guides, third-party material that will help you learn something new every time you listen to one of these episodes. So the third and final topic for this episode today is building a feedback culture. So building a feedback culture is super important, because as you grow, your status will grow with you within the company. People are naturally fearful of sharing their feedback because they don't know what the consequences will be. And many of us rely on 360 surveys within the organization, the 360 degrees surveys, which is done usually by HR. But even with that, I've been on the giving and the receiving end. When I was on the giving end, should I trust HR for if I share my input that it will be anonymous and it will remain anonymous? That's one. The second thing is, if I'm on the receiving end, people share what they perceive. If I'm tough with them and they don't like me being tough with them and they don't like accountability, they'll probably share bad feedback about me, which will probably hurt me. And if it becomes a rumor and spreads like fire, it will definitely hurt me career-wise, and even for potential promotions, and I might even lose my job eventually. So how do I deal with the situation? This article was very interesting because the author of this article, Ron Carucci, is basically highlighting that you need to look for different ways to build trust and allow people to give you critical feedback. The article is titled 4 Ways to Get Honest Critical Feedback from Your Employees. I'll leave the link to the article in the description below. So the first point he emphasizes is ask your coworkers to push back. So Carucci points out that it's not enough to just be open to feedback. You have to actively invite it. I've applied this myself, but it's not easy, especially when people report directly to you. How do you build that trust without compromising with the level of respect that you're receiving or that's required to run the company? And why? Because some will abuse that freedom to give feedback, becoming toxic in meetings. I've actually experienced that because I've been experimenting with these approaches for many years, and I've been trying different tactics to diffuse any of these toxic behaviors or feedback, to allow people who are quiet, who have really good ideas and things to say and constructive feedback, to speak up and become more confident. And I think, in my view, that is part of the secret recipe of how to make this work. So it's crucial to refocus on constructive feedback, always aiming for outcomes that benefit the team. And it's okay to say in a meeting, I get your point, thank you for sharing your feedback. I'd like to focus on this specific outcome. Let's say, for example, how to deal with angry customers, right? An angry customer who doesn't want to understand that the policy that was built to protect them is actually making that customer feel upset. As an example, right? It could be like in the payments industry, there is a hold period, and we face this all the time. The customer believes that the hold period is unfair, but according to the policies by the banks, by the regulators, we need to hold a certain amount for 20 days, 30 days, depends on the policy, especially if they triggered a suspicious behavior. These kinds of approaches allows you to reframe the discussion, and instead of getting sucked into toxic discussions. And from experience, there is no silver bullet to remedy this. You just will get better with practice. And the smaller the team, the better it is. And if you have a team of 30, I suggest break them down into smaller teams. So if you have a team, don't let any team become more than maximum 10 or 11. That's my opinion. I think the optimal will be keeping them below 8 members in every meeting. But again, these are things that people have different preferences on, and there are studies and articles on them. So I'll leave that discussion for another episode. The fourth point or recommendation Carucci has is read nonverbal cues. I did a course in psychology in the university, and I remember our first assignment was to go and sit in the mall and pick someone who's walking and try to observe and build a persona around them. And that was an excellent exercise because that was the best way to help me analyze people's behaviors and spot them while they're in front of me, not judge them because of the way they dress, the way they talk. But also it's fine if you are just observing and recording your observations. But as I started getting deeper into it, I discovered that we as human beings do so many things that we are not aware of, like crossing your arms when you're sitting in a discussion that's uncomfortable, or suddenly changing your posture, whether you're holding your neck high, whether you're curving your back, when you're having a discussion with someone, using certain phrases, repeating certain phrases. I encourage you to do your own research about this. You'll feel that, even including not making eye contact when you're not telling the truth, or when we're talking about an uncomfortable subject. I do that all the time, and most of the time at least, I catch myself. And I made sure that my direct reports, people that I coach, and will point out these things to me. And even my coaches and mentors as well. You have to have coaches, you have to have mentors. Your coach could be a paid coach, you can hire someone, or you could just focus on having a mentor that could coach you, that could mentor you, whatever is the best approach or what's available for you around you. But these are things that will raise your self-awareness about yourself on the receiving end, and also on the giving end. How do you frame it for people? If you notice that someone is not making eye contact with you, that means whatever you tell them, probably if they're uncomfortable receiving feedback from you, that means it's either not the right time, or you have to turn it into a different, rephrase it. So instead of telling them, you have to ask them questions. Like, for example, what makes you uncomfortable about what I have said? So team members may not verbalize their concerns, but their body language speaks volumes. For instance, I've noticed that when someone avoids eye contact or becomes overly fidgety during feedback sessions, it's a sign they're not receptive at that moment. So reschedule, do something else. If possible, I suggest rescheduling the conversation for a time when they're more open. And remember, virtual meetings make it harder to catch these cues. So video calls are preferable to get a better read on the room. Also, in my experience, I ask, and this is probably where some of my colleagues find me annoying, is in the management meetings, I like having video calls. Even if people are at home or working from home, I like having these video meetings because they're the closest thing to us being physically there. And it's not about just seeing the cues, the visual cues, but also somehow psychologically we're still wired to look at each other when we talk. It makes the discussions warmer. You can joke around and people can see each other smiling, and these smiles, communicate them over a voice call. The third point is monitor how you narrate your story. So we all have blind spots, especially when it comes to justifying our decisions. I've caught myself at times rationalizing choices or dismissing feedback without fully considering it. It's important to recognize these moments, pause and reflect. Every time you reflect, something happens in our brains that records that, learns the lesson, and then the probability of it happening again reduces. You have to be comfortable with the idea that you can never become perfect and eliminate all of these vulnerabilities and blind spots. Having someone around you who can gently point out when your ego takes over or takes control can be invaluable. Between my siblings and my wife, so I've got these people that I trust. And at work as well, it's the same. And at work, especially, if you're not receptive to feedback, no one will give you feedback. You need to show that you're receptive to feedback, right? And finally, the fourth point or recommendation that Carucci shares is self-awareness. Know your triggers. Self-awareness is key to managing emotional responses to feedback. I often encourage my team to point out when I'm getting sidetracked or overly emotional. We get overly emotional, especially in high-stakes situations. Passion can sometimes cloud our judgment, especially if you love what you're doing, if you love the startup you're working for. But having a trusted colleague to reel you back can keep things on track. So look for that colleague. Have those people that you trust around you. Be open to them. Now, I understand there are vulnerabilities that this could introduce, which is fine. Just being aware of these vulnerabilities will also protect you. So that's it. That's a wrap for today's episode. I hope these insights on mastering leadership, whether through the LEDA Leadership Framework, the ABM Leadership Framework, or creating a feedback culture, give you the tools to excel in your startup journey. Leadership isn't just about steering your team. It's about empowering them, continuing to learn, and adapting to change. If you enjoyed today's episode or today's discussion, please share it with someone who might benefit. And don't forget to subscribe to Coffee and Career Chats for more actionable insights in the future. And we're available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And please make sure that you share your feedback as well. I'd like to learn what your preferences are so that we can continue improving these episodes. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day. Have a great week ahead. Until next week.